The bell rang loudly, signaling the end of lunch break and the start of the next class. Students filed into room 203, their chatter filling the air like static noise. It was music theory class, one of those subjects most kids didn't care much about unless they were already into instruments or singing. Marcus Johnson walked in last, keeping his head low as usual. He wasn't particularly excited about this class either, but it was required. So there he was, sliding into his seat near the back corner. Ms. Evelyn Harper stood at the front of the room, adjusting her glasses while scanning the rows of teenagers settling into their desks. Her gray hair was pulled tightly into a bun, giving her a no-nonsense appearance that matched her tone perfectly. Everyone knew she could be harsh when she wanted to be, especially if you weren't paying attention during lessons. But today, something seemed different. There was an edge to her voice that made even the chattiest students quiet down quickly. "All right, everyone," she began, tapping a ruler against the chalkboard for emphasis. "Today we're going to talk about classical composers and how their work shaped modern music. I want each of you to think about why understanding these pieces matters, not just for exams but for your appreciation of art itself." Marcus tried to focus, scribbling notes in his notebook as Ms. Harper droned on about Bach and Mozart. He liked listening to music well enough, though he preferred jazz and hip-hop to anything classical. Still, he did his best to keep up because failing wasn't an option, not when his dad worked so hard to send him to this school. As the lesson progressed, Ms. Harper started asking questions, pointing randomly at students to answer. Most of them stumbled through their responses, earning sighs or sharp remarks from her. When she turned her gaze toward Marcus, however, something changed. Instead of asking him about Beethoven or symphonies, she smirked slightly and said, "Marcus, do you even know what a piano is?" The room went silent. A few heads swiveled toward him, eyebrows raised. Marcus froze, unsure how to respond. He hadn't done anything wrong, he hadn't interrupted or fallen asleep, but somehow he felt like he'd been singled out anyway. "Well?" Ms. Harper pressed, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Have you ever touched one? Played one? Or are pianos not really your thing?" Marcus clenched his jaw, heat rising to his cheeks. He hated moments like this where people assumed things about him based on stereotypes. Sure, he didn't come from a wealthy family, and yes, his clothes weren't designer brands, but that didn't mean he didn't have skills or interests. Before he could say anything, though, Ms. Harper continued. "Why don't you show us?" she suggested, gesturing dramatically toward the old upright piano pushed against the side wall. "Come on, Marcus, let's see what you've got." Some students snickered quietly while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Marcus felt trapped. He couldn't refuse without looking guilty, but playing in front of everyone felt impossible too. Reluctantly, he stood up and walked to the piano, dragging his feet as if hoping time would slow down. When he reached the bench, he hesitated, staring at the keys. They looked worn, some yellowed with age, but still functional. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He'd always loved music. It was one of the few things that helped him escape stress, but he'd never imagined being forced to play publicly like this. "Go ahead," Ms. Harper urged, folding her arms across her chest. "Don't tell me you've never touched a piano before." Marcus glanced at her briefly before placing his hands on the keys. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, almost instinctively, his fingers began to move. The first notes rang out softly, tentative and unsure. But as he continued, something remarkable happened. The hesitant melody transformed into something rich and complex, weaving together chords and rhythms that filled the entire room. No one spoke. No one moved. Even Ms. Harper, who had clearly expected a clumsy attempt at chopsticks, found herself frozen in place. The piece Marcus played wasn't something from their textbook, it was something deeper, more personal. Each note carried emotion, pain, joy, longing, all wrapped up in a sound that felt both familiar and entirely new. By the time he finished, the silence stretched on for several seconds. Finally, someone clapped awkwardly, breaking the spell. Others joined in hesitantly, unsure whether applause was appropriate. Marcus sat motionless, his heart pounding as he realized what he'd just done. Ms. Harper stared at him, her mouth slightly open. She blinked once, twice, then cleared her throat. "Well," she said finally, her voice quieter than before. "That was unexpected." Marcus slid off the bench and returned to his seat without saying a word. As the rest of the class resumed, whispers buzzed around him. Some students complimented him under their breath, while others speculated about where he'd learned to play like that. All Marcus could think about, though, was the look on Ms. Harper's face, a mixture of shock, confusion, and maybe, just maybe, a hint of respect. And in that moment, despite everything, Marcus felt a small spark of pride. The next day at school, word had spread quickly about what happened in Ms. Harper's class. By lunchtime, it seemed like everyone knew about Marcus's performance. Even students who weren't there whispered about it in the hallways. Some were genuinely impressed, clapping him on the back or giving him thumbs up as they passed by. Others, however, weren't so kind. They muttered things under their breath, questioning how someone like Marcus could possibly play like that. "Did you take lessons or something?" one boy asked during gym class, raising an eyebrow. "I mean, no offense, but you don't exactly look like the classical type." Marcus shrugged, avoiding eye contact. He didn't want to explain himself to anyone, especially not people who only cared because of the spectacle. Truthfully, he hadn't taken formal lessons, not the kind most kids got anyway. What he knew came from hours spent watching videos online, mimicking what he heard and practicing late into the night when the house was quiet. Music had always been his escape, a way to deal with stress and loneliness. But now, it felt like everyone wanted to pick apart how he'd learned it. Meanwhile, Ms. Harper couldn't stop thinking about what she'd witnessed. After class ended that afternoon, she sat alone in her office, staring blankly at the stack of papers on her desk. She replayed the moment over and over in her mind, the way Marcus's hands moved across the keys, the emotion behind each note, the stunned silence that followed. It didn't make sense to her. How could someone from such a modest background possess that level of skill? Determined to find answers, Ms. Harper decided to dig deeper. She started by checking Marcus's file in the school records. To her surprise, there was nothing unusual. No mention of private lessons, no participation in advanced music programs. His grades were decent but unremarkable, and his extracurricular activities consisted mostly of helping out around the community center after school. Curiosity gnawed at her, so she went further. Later that week, she approached Principal Lewis during a staff meeting. "Do we know anything about Marcus Johnson's background?" she asked casually, trying to sound nonchalant. "Like, does he have any connections to professional musicians? Family members who might have taught him?" Principal Lewis frowned slightly, glancing up from his notes. "Not that I'm aware of," he replied. "Why do you ask?" Ms. Harper hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "It's just, he played the piano in class the other day and I was curious about where he learned." The principal raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. "Well, if you're interested, maybe talk to him directly. Sometimes these kids have hidden talents we don't realize." That evening, unable to let it go, Ms. Harper drove past Marcus's neighborhood on her way home. She told herself she was just being thorough, gathering context to better understand her student. But as she slowed down near his house, a small, weathered bungalow with peeling paint and a cracked driveway, she felt a pang of guilt. This wasn't the kind of environment she associated with prodigies. There were no grand pianos visible through the windows, no signs of wealth or privilege. Just a simple home, like so many others in the area. Over the next few days, Ms. Harper kept observing Marcus more closely. During class, she noticed how he carried himself, quietly confident, yet reserved, as if he preferred staying in the background. When called upon, he answered questions thoughtfully, revealing a sharp mind beneath his reserved exterior. And then there were moments when he seemed distracted, gazing out the window or scribbling notes in the margins of his textbook. Something about him intrigued her, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. One afternoon, after dismissing her last class, Ms. Harper stayed behind to grade papers. As she flipped through Marcus's latest assignment, she found herself pausing. His handwriting was neat, almost artistic, and his answers showed insight beyond his years. For the first time, she wondered if she'd misjudged him, not just his musical ability, but everything else too. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Looking up, she saw Marcus standing there, clutching a folder. "You wanted to see me?" he asked cautiously. "Yes, come in," she said, gesturing to a chair. Once he sat down, she cleared her throat. "I wanted to talk about your performance the other day. That piece you played, it was beautiful. Where did you learn it?" Marcus hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I made it up," he admitted, finally. "Well, sort of. I took bits and pieces from songs I've heard and put them together." Ms. Harper blinked, surprised. "You composed it yourself?" He nodded, looking down at his hands. "Yeah. I write stuff sometimes, just for fun." "And the technique, the way you played, it's self-taught?" Again, he nodded. "Mostly. I watch videos online and practice whenever I can. My neighbor lets me use their old keyboard sometimes." Ms. Harper leaned back in her chair, processing this information. Self-taught, composing original pieces, practicing on borrowed equipment. None of it aligned with her assumptions about students like Marcus. In fact, it challenged everything she thought she knew. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of shame. Shame for mocking him, for letting her biases cloud her judgment. Shame for assuming he wouldn't understand classical music simply because of where he came from. But alongside the shame was something else, a spark of admiration. Here was a young man who had overcome obstacles she couldn't even imagine, all while nurturing a gift that left seasoned musicians speechless. As Marcus stood to leave, Ms. Harper stopped him. "Thank you for sharing that with me," she said softly. "And I apologize for doubting you. You're incredibly talented, Marcus. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, searching her face for sincerity. Then with a slight nod, he turned and walked out of the room. Back at home that night, Ms. Harper sat alone in her living room, staring at the ceiling. She thought about Marcus's story, the hours spent teaching himself, the sacrifices he must have made to pursue his passion. And she thought about her own career, the countless students she'd dismissed without truly seeing them. For the first time in a long time, she questioned whether she deserved to call herself a teacher. But amidst the guilt and regret, there was also hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she could still make a difference, for Marcus and for others like him. The next morning, Ms. Harper arrived at school earlier than usual. She spent the first hour rearranging her classroom, clearing out old posters, and replacing them with new ones about famous composers who had overcome adversity. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a way to show Marcus that she was trying. When the bell rang and students began filing in, she made sure to greet each one warmly, including Marcus, though he still seemed wary of her intentions. After class ended, Ms. Harper approached Marcus again. This time her tone was gentler, almost apologetic. "Marcus," she said, catching his attention before he could leave. "I've been thinking, there's a regional piano competition coming up next month. I think you should consider entering." Marcus stopped in his tracks, turning to face her, his brow furrowed as he processed what she'd just said. "A competition?" he repeated slowly, unsure whether to take her seriously. "You're joking, right?" "No, I'm not," she replied firmly. "Your talent deserves recognition, Marcus, and this could be a great opportunity for you." He crossed his arms, suspicion evident in his eyes. "Why are you doing this now? You didn't care before." Ms. Harper flinched at his words, knowing they were true. "You're right," she admitted, lowering her voice. "I messed up, but I want to make things right. If you agree to enter, I'll help you prepare. We can work together, just the two of us, to get you ready." Marcus hesitated, weighing her offer. On one hand, he didn't trust her completely. After all, she'd mocked him in front of the entire class only days ago. But on the other hand, competing in a piano contest sounded incredible. It was something he'd never dreamed possible, a chance to share his music with a wider audience. "What's the catch?" he asked finally, narrowing his eyes. "No catch," Ms. Harper promised. "Just Give me a chance to prove I'm serious about helping you." After a long pause, Marcus nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but if you try anything funny, I'm out." "Fair enough," she agreed, offering a small smile. Their first practice session took place later that week in the school's music room. It was late afternoon, and the fading sunlight cast long shadows across the floor. Marcus sat at the piano looking uneasy as Ms. Harper pulled up a chair beside him. "Okay," she began, opening a folder filled with sheet music. "Let's start by going over some basics. Posture, technique, dynamics. All the things judges will look for." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "I already know how to play," he reminded her. "I'm sure you do," she said quickly, raising her hands in defense. "But competitions are different. You need to impress people who might not understand your style right away. That means balancing creativity with precision." For the next hour, they worked through various exercises, with Ms. Harper guiding him step by step. At first, their interactions were stiff and formal, with Marcus responding to her instructions with short, clipped answers. But as they continued, he began to relax, allowing himself to focus on the music rather than the tension between them. By the end of the session, Ms. Harper couldn't help but notice a change in Marcus. He seemed more confident, more willing to engage. Even his playing had improved, not because he lacked skill, but because he was starting to trust her. As the weeks passed, their practices became a regular routine. They met 3 times a week, sometimes staying late into the evening. During these sessions, Ms. Harper pushed Marcus to refine his technique while encouraging him to stay true to his unique style. In return, Marcus opened up little by little, sharing stories about his love for music and the challenges he faced growing up. One evening, as they wrapped up another session, Ms. Harper decided to broach a sensitive topic. "Marcus," she began, hesitantly, "can I ask you something personal?" He glanced at her warily. "Depends." She took a deep breath. "How do you feel about, well, about me? About everything that's happened?" Marcus sighed, leaning back against the piano bench. For a moment he didn't say anything. Then, in a quiet voice, he replied, "I don't hate you if that's what you're asking. But it's hard to forget what you said. You judged me without even knowing me." Ms. Harper nodded, guilt washing over her. "I know. And I'm sorry. I wish I could take it back, but I can't. All I can do is try to make things better, for you and for others like you." Marcus studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "I guess we'll see." Despite their rocky start, their partnership began to blossom into something unexpected: mutual respect. Ms. Harper marveled at Marcus's dedication, his ability to pour his heart into every note he played. For his part, Marcus started to see glimpses of vulnerability beneath Ms. Harper's stern exterior. He realized she wasn't perfect, but neither was he, and maybe, just maybe, they could learn from each other. Outside of their rehearsals, life continued as usual for Marcus. At home, his dad noticed the extra hours he spent practicing and teased him good-naturedly about becoming a famous musician. At school, rumors swirled about his upcoming competition, with some classmates cheering him on and others rolling their eyes. Through it all, Marcus remained focused, determined to prove that he belonged on that stage. Meanwhile, Ms. Harper faced challenges of her own. Word got around among the faculty that she was mentoring Marcus, sparking whispers in the teacher's lounge. Some praised her for stepping outside her comfort zone, while others accused her of favoritism, or worse, hypocrisy. "You're really going to mentor him after everything?" one colleague asked during lunch one day, raising an eyebrow. "Isn't that a bit ironic?" Ms. Harper clenched her jaw but forced herself to remain calm. "Yes, I am," she replied evenly. "And if anyone has a problem with it, they can talk to me directly." Her response earned her a few glares, but it also solidified her resolve. She knew she couldn't erase the harm caused by her past actions overnight, but she could take steps toward redemption, one lesson at a time. As the competition drew closer, Both Marcus and Ms. Harper poured their energy into preparing. They practiced scales, experimented with new pieces, and fine-tuned every detail of his performance. Though nerves occasionally got the better of them, they always found a way to push through, united by a shared goal. On the night before the big day, Ms. Harper handed Marcus a neatly typed list of reminders. "Breathe deeply," it read. "Focus on the music, not the audience. Remember why you're here." Marcus smiled faintly as he tucked the note into his pocket. For the first time, he felt ready, not just to compete, but to show the world who he truly was. As the competition approached, the pressure began to mount, not just for Marcus, but for everyone involved. At home, Marcus struggled to balance his practice schedule with helping his dad around the house. His father worked long hours at 2 jobs, leaving Marcus responsible for many household chores. Some nights, after finishing dinner dishes or folding laundry, he'd sit at the neighbor's keyboard, exhausted but determined to squeeze in a few more minutes of practice. His dad noticed the toll it was taking on him. One evening, as Marcus slumped into a chair at the kitchen table, his dad placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You okay, son?" he asked gently. "You've been pushing yourself pretty hard lately." Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm fine," he muttered, though his tired eyes told a different story. "It's just, I don't want to mess this up, not when so much is riding on it." His dad nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility Marcus carried. "Just remember why you're doing this," he said firmly. "Not for anyone else, but for yourself. Don't let the pressure crush you, all right?" Marcus managed a weak smile. "Yeah, I'll try." At school, things weren't much easier. While some students offered encouragement, others mocked him behind his back. During lunch breaks, he overheard snide comments about how he was trying too hard or getting ahead of himself. A few even suggested that Ms. Harper must have rigged the whole thing to make herself look good. "Why does she care so much anyway?" one boy whispered loudly enough for Marcus to hear. "She hates everyone else. What makes him so special?" Marcus clenched his fists under the cafeteria table, biting back an angry retort. He wanted to defend himself, or better yet, ignore them altogether. But the words stung nonetheless. Deep down, he wondered if they were right. Was Ms. Harper mentoring him out of genuine remorse, or was it all just damage control? Ms. Harper, meanwhile, faced her own challenges. Rumors about her involvement with Marcus spread like wildfire among the faculty, sparking heated debates in staff meetings. Some colleagues accused her of favoritism, claiming she was using Marcus to redeem her tarnished reputation. Others argued that her actions were commendable, proof that she was capable of growth and change. Principal Lewis called her into his office one afternoon to address the growing controversy. "Evelyn," he began cautiously, leaning forward in his chair, "there's been some talk about your work with Marcus. Are you sure this isn't going to cause problems? For you? Or for the school?" Ms. Harper hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I understand the concerns," she admitted. "But Marcus has real talent, Principal Lewis. If we don't support him now, who will? This isn't about me, it's about giving him a chance to shine." The principal studied her for a moment, then sighed. "All right. Just tread carefully." "Evelyn, you know how sensitive these situations can be." Back in her classroom later that day, Ms. Harper replayed their conversation in her mind. She knew the risks, knew that supporting Marcus could backfire spectacularly. But every time she saw him pouring his heart into his music, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. If nothing else, she owed it to him, and to herself, to see this through. Despite the mounting tensions, Marcus and Ms. Harper continued their preparations. Their sessions grew longer and more intense, with both of them pouring everything they had into perfecting his performance. Yet cracks began to form beneath the surface. One evening, during a particularly grueling rehearsal, Marcus snapped, "I can't do this anymore," he exclaimed, slamming his hands down on the keys. The discordant sound echoed through the empty room, startling them both. Ms. Harper blinked, taken aback by his outburst. "Marcus, what's wrong?" "What's wrong?" he repeated bitterly, standing up. "Everything's wrong. My classmates think I'm some kind of fraud. My dad barely sleeps because he's working so hard to keep us afloat, and you—" He paused, glaring at her. "Sometimes I wonder if you're really doing this for me, or just to save your own skin." Ms. Harper flinched, guilt washing over her. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Then softly she replied, "You're right to question my motives, Marcus. I won't deny that I've made mistakes, terrible ones. But I'm here now trying to help you because I believe in your talent. And yes, maybe part of it is selfish. Maybe I want to prove something to myself too. But none of that changes the fact that you deserve this opportunity." Her honesty caught Marcus off guard. Slowly, his anger faded, replaced by a mixture of frustration and sadness. I don't know if I can handle all this," he admitted quietly. "What if I fail? What if everyone laughs at me?" "They won't," Ms. Harper assured him, stepping closer. "And even if they do, it doesn't matter. Music isn't about impressing people, it's about telling your story. Yours is worth hearing, Marcus, trust me." For a long moment they stood in silence, the weight of her words hanging between them. Finally, Marcus nodded, sitting back down at the piano. "Okay," he said softly. "Let's finish this piece." Over the next few days, their bond strengthened as they worked tirelessly toward the competition. Marcus threw himself into his practice, channeling his frustrations into his playing. Each note became a release, a way to express emotions he couldn't put into words. Ms. Harper, for her part, did everything she could to ease his burden, offering advice not just on technique but on handling nerves and staying focused. Then came the final blow. On the eve of the competition, Marcus overheard a conversation between Ms. Harper and Principal Lewis outside the auditorium. Peering through a crack in the door, he saw them deep in discussion, their expressions grim. "We might lose funding for the arts program entirely," Ms. Harper was saying, her voice tinged with desperation. "If Marcus doesn't perform well tomorrow, it could seal the deal." The principal nodded solemnly. "Do what you can, Evelyn, but be prepared for the worst." Marcus felt his stomach drop. So that was it. All this time he'd thought Ms. Harper genuinely believed in him, but now it seemed clear that her motivations were tied to saving the school's budget. Betrayal surged through him, sharp and bitter. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his mind racing. That night, lying awake in bed, Marcus wrestled with doubt. Should he pull out of the competition altogether? Would it even matter if he won or lost, knowing the real reason behind Ms. Harper's support? Sleep eluded him as he replayed the day's events over and over, searching for answers. When morning finally came, Marcus still hadn't made up his mind. As he packed his bag and headed to school, he realized there was only one person who could convince him to stay: Ms. Harper herself. The morning of the competition dawned bright and clear, though Marcus felt anything but calm. He woke up early, his mind racing with doubts and questions. Should he go through with this? Was it worth it, knowing that Ms. Harper might have ulterior motives? As he got ready, he replayed the conversation he'd overheard between her and Principal Lewis. The thought gnawed at him. What if all his hard work was just being used to save the school's arts program? By the time he arrived at the auditorium where the competition was being held, Marcus still hadn't made up his mind. The building loomed ahead of him, its tall windows reflecting the sunlight like a beacon. Inside, the air buzzed with excitement as contestants warmed up, their notes blending into a chaotic symphony. Parents, teachers, and friends milled about, chatting animatedly or adjusting costumes and sheet music. Ms. Harper spotted Marcus as soon as he walked in. She approached him cautiously, sensing his unease. "Marcus," she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Are you okay?" He hesitated, unsure how to respond. Finally, he blurted out, "I heard you talking to Principal Lewis last night." Ms. Harper froze, her face paling slightly. For a moment she didn't say anything, then, taking a deep breath, she nodded. "You're right to be upset," she admitted. Yes, I did talk to him about funding. And yes, part of why I pushed so hard for you to compete was because I hoped it would help save the program. But that doesn't change the truth, Marcus. You're incredibly talented. You deserve to be here regardless of my reasons. Her honesty caught him off guard. He studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. All he saw was sincerity and maybe a hint of fear. Fear that she'd lose him now, after everything they'd worked toward together. I don't know what to think anymore, Marcus admitted quietly. I wanted this to be about me, about my music. It is about you, Ms. Harper insisted, stepping closer. No matter what happens today, your talent speaks for itself. Don't let anyone take that away from you, not even me. For a long moment they stood in silence, the weight of her words sinking in. Finally, Marcus nodded. All right, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Let's do this. With that, they headed backstage to prepare. The other competitors were already there, some pacing nervously while others practiced scales or reviewed their sheet music. Most were older than Marcus, dressed in expensive suits and dresses that screamed privilege. They glanced at him curiously, clearly wondering who he was and how he'd ended up competing against them. As Marcus waited for his turn, he closed his eyes and focused on his breathing. He thought about his mom, who had always encouraged him to follow his dreams even when times were tough. He thought about his dad working tirelessly to give him opportunities, and he thought about the countless hours he'd spent teaching himself to play, pouring his heart into every note. When his name was called, Marcus stepped onto the stage, blinking against the bright lights. The audience fell silent as he sat, down at the grand piano, its polished surface gleaming under the spotlight. For a moment he simply rested his hands on the keys, letting the stillness wash over him. Then, without hesitation, he began to play. It wasn't one of the classical pieces Ms. Harper had drilled him on. It was something entirely his own. A haunting melody flowed from the keys, weaving together fragments of memories and emotions. Each note carried the pain of loss, the joy of discovery, and the resilience of someone who refused to give up. The piece was raw and powerful, unlike anything anyone had ever heard before. In the audience, jaws dropped. Judges leaned forward in their seats, captivated by the depth and originality of his composition. Even the other contestants stopped whispering among themselves, mesmerized by the sheer emotion radiating from the stage. Backstage, Ms. Harper watched through the curtain, tears streaming down her face. She had known Marcus was talented, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. It wasn't just music, it was storytelling, a window into his soul. And in that moment she realized she hadn't just helped him prepare for a competition, she'd helped him find his voice. When the final note faded into silence, the room erupted into applause. People stood, cheering wildly as Marcus rose from the bench and bowed deeply. His heart pounded in his chest, not from nerves but from exhilaration. For the first time he truly felt seen, not as a stereotype or a token, but as a musician worthy of respect. Afterward, during the judging deliberations, Marcus mingled awkwardly with the other contestants. Some congratulated him sincerely, while others kept their distance, clearly intimidated by his performance. Ms. Harper joined him eventually, her eyes shining with pride. "You were amazing," she said simply, unable to hide her smile. "Absolutely incredible." Marcus looked at her, then nodded. "Thanks," he replied. "For everything." Though the results wouldn't be announced until later that evening, Marcus already felt like a winner. No matter what the judges decided, he knew he'd accomplished something far greater than winning a trophy. He'd proven to himself that his dreams were valid, no matter where he came from. That night, when the awards ceremony finally arrived, Marcus listened anxiously as the IE judges read off the names of the winners. Third place went to a girl from a prestigious conservatory. Second place went to a boy whose family owned a chain of music schools. And then, finally, the announcer called out his name. First place goes to Marcus Johnson, the crowd erupted, again as Marcus stepped forward to accept his award. A gleaming trophy and a certificate for a full scholarship to study music at a renowned university. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment forever. Backstage, Ms. Harper wiped away tears, overwhelmed by a mixture of pride and relief. As Marcus returned to his seat, clutching the trophy tightly, he glanced back at Ms. Harper. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment they shared an unspoken understanding. Redemption wasn't about erasing past mistakes. It was about finding ways to move forward, together. And for both of them, this was only the beginning. Years passed and life moved forward for everyone touched by that unforgettable day at the regional piano competition. For Marcus, winning first place was more than just a personal victory. It opened doors he never thought possible. The scholarship allowed him to attend a prestigious university, where he studied music composition under some of the best instructors in the country. At first, adjusting to such a competitive environment wasn't easy. Many of his peers came from wealthy families, or had spent years training at elite conservatories, but Marcus's raw talent and determination quickly earned him respect among both classmates and professors. Outside of academics, Marcus continued to push boundaries with his compositions. He blended classical techniques with jazz, hip-hop, and gospel influences, creating a sound uniquely his own. His pieces often told stories about growing up in a modest household, about losing his mother, and about finding strength in adversity. Audiences connected deeply with his work, and soon, invitations to perform began pouring in from all over the country. Despite his growing success, Marcus never forgot where he came from. Whenever he returned home during breaks, he made time to visit the community center where he'd practiced on borrowed keyboards as a teenager. There, he taught free lessons to kids who reminded him of himself, young, eager, and full of untapped potential. Seeing their faces light up when they mastered a new chord or melody filled him with a sense of purpose that no award could match. Meanwhile, Ms. Harper underwent her own transformation. After the competition, she became a vocal advocate for arts, education, fighting tirelessly to preserve funding for programs like the one that had nearly been cut. She organized fundraisers, wrote letters to local officials, and even started a mentorship initiative pairing struggling students with teachers, willing to invest extra time and effort. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Though some colleagues still held grudges, many began to see her in a new light, as someone committed to making a difference. One afternoon, several years after Marcus graduated, Ms. Harper received an email inviting her to a special event at the high school. Curious, she clicked on it and felt her heart skip a beat. It was an announcement for a concert featuring none other than Marcus Johnson, now a celebrated pianist returning to his hometown for a performance. The subject line read, "A night of music and gratitude." Ms. Harper wasn't sure what to expect. Would Marcus want to see her? Had he forgiven her for everything that happened between them? These questions weighed heavily on her mind as she prepared for the evening. The night of the concert arrived, and the school auditorium buzzed with excitement. Families, former students, and community members packed the seats, eager to hear Marcus play. As Ms. Harper took her seat in the back row, she scanned the program, noticing that Marcus had included a note of thanks to those who believed in me when I doubted myself. Her eyes welled up with tears as she realized he might actually be referring to her. When Marcus finally appeared on stage, the crowd erupted into applause. Dressed in a sleek black suit, he looked every bit the accomplished musician he had become. He smiled warmly at the audience before sitting down at the grand piano placed center stage. Before beginning, he leaned toward the microphone and spoke. I want to dedicate tonight's performance to my mom, whose love continues to guide me, and to my dad, whose sacrifices made this journey possible," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "And I also want to thank someone very important, an unexpected ally who helped me find my path. Ms. Harper, wherever you are, I hope you're listening." Ms. Harper froze, her breath catching in her throat. She glanced around nervously, wondering if anyone else had noticed the mention of her name. Then, without another word, Marcus began to play. The piece he chose was familiar yet transformed, a reimagined version of the melody he'd composed for the competition years ago. This time, however, it was richer, more refined, layered with harmonies and rhythms that showcased how far he'd come as an artist. Every note resonated through the auditorium, leaving listeners spellbound. As the final chords faded, the room erupted into thunderous applause. People stood cheering and whistling as Marcus rose from the bench and bowed deeply. When the noise subsided, he turned back to the microphone. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he said, smiling. "But most of all, thank you to my mentors both, past and present, who showed me that music has the power to heal, inspire, and bring people together. Without them, I wouldn't be here." From her seat in the back row, Ms. Harper wiped away tears, overwhelmed by gratitude and humility. She hadn't expected this kind of acknowledgement, let alone forgiveness. As Marcus left the stage, he spotted her in the crowd and gave her a small nod, his expression softening. After the concert ended, Ms. Harper lingered outside the auditorium, unsure whether to approach him. Just as she decided to leave, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Ms. Harper?" She turned to see Marcus standing there, holding his trophy from the competition, the same one he'd won years ago. He smiled shyly, extending a hand. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." Ms. Harper hesitated for a moment before shaking his hand firmly. "No, Marcus," she replied, her voice trembling. "Thank you. You've reminded me why I became a teacher in the first place." They stood there for a moment, sharing an unspoken understanding. Though their relationship had been complicated, marked by prejudice, redemption, and mutual growth, they had both emerged stronger because of it. Through music, they had found common ground, bridging gaps neither thought possible. In the years that followed, Marcus went on to achieve even greater heights, performing on world stages and composing award-winning scores for films and documentaries. Yet he always made time to return to his roots, using his platform to advocate for underprivileged youth and underserved communities. His story inspired countless others to pursue their dreams, no matter the obstacles. As for Ms. Harper, she retired from teaching a few years later, leaving behind a legacy of change and compassion. Her advocacy for arts education ensured that future generations would have opportunities to explore their creativity, regardless of background or circumstance. On the day of her retirement party, Marcus surprised her by presenting her with a framed photo of them taken after his concert. "I'll never forget what you did for me," he told her sincerely. "Even if it didn't start out perfect, it turned into something amazing." Ms. Harper smiled, clutching the frame tightly. "Neither will I," she replied. "Neither will I." And as they parted ways, each knew they had played a role in something bigger than themselves, a testament to the transformative power of music, forgiveness, and second chances.